So we're approaching the end of June, and Andrew Green's now been on site several times, and Andrew's priorities during these initial visits is to really shape and finalize greens. And so we got Brian and Nathan with me today, and we're going to talk through how the changes in the greens are going to impact the playing experience for the golfer, and then dive a little bit further into greens construction. And so we start with Nathan and talk a little bit about how Andrew goes about shaping the green itself with the blueprints really as a guidepost, and what these changes are going to mean for the golfer.
The thing that really strikes me first and foremost is the expansiveness. We've gone from sort of a circle green complex to a square green complexes, which is reminiscent of what we're going to see thematically throughout our greens, is a little bit larger green complexes as a byproduct of those expansions. We're going to see a lot more hole location. For us as golfers, hitting a longer approach into this 11th hole, it's going to be a lot of fun having to hit a longish club into a little bit more sections or quadrants of the greens.
So obviously here on hole 11, we had pretty good usable space originally, at least as it relates to some other holes in the golf course that were maybe a little bit trickier, like 15 or 12 or 18. Maybe talk to us a little bit about how Andrew's using that blueprint as a guidepost, but then having to interpret those blueprints in the field for creating pin positions for a modern game with much faster green speeds and things of that nature.
As we're standing here on the 11th hole, I had a lot of good hole locations here on this existing 11th. When I look across here, the back 9, when I think about holes 12 or 15 as examples here on the south side of the boulevard, very few areas where our grounds team could put a hole location where we could putt to, where we could put a hole location which would receive a wedge to. A decent sized surface area, but relatively small in terms of where we could put a hole location. Certainly I think one of the highlights of what we're going to see is being able to replicate the putt hit by Bobby Jones on the 18th. I think is going to be just a fabulous opportunity, and certainly things have changed a lot. Back in the Bobby Jones era, the green speeds were a little bit slower. Grass was a bit longer. Thanks to agronomic practices, the greens are faster nowadays, and so commensurately, Andrew and team are going to adapt those slopes and contours so that we'll be able to hopefully replicate some of those Bobby Jones putts here at the club.
Well, speaking of agronomy, that's a good segue. We've got Brian here to talk about the process now from the time Andrew finalizes the green to when we'll actually be seeding it here in several weeks, and take us through that construction process and what's going to happen from here.
So on this surface, you can see flags representing the outside edge of the new green surface. However, you'll see some orange painted lines within the contours of the green, and that's part of the modified depth green construction that we're going to be utilizing to try to control and make the moisture levels throughout the green more consistent. The fronts of greens are going to receive oftentimes more greens mix, 14 inches of mix, trying to have water pull down into the drainage below, having a nice firm surface to make sure that shots are going to be able to be received and play really nicely onto these green surfaces. Any odd high points on greens are going to receive less greens mix. So they're going to receive 10 inches of greens mix, and that is trying to keep moisture up into those areas. Oftentimes any mounding or unique features like that will dry out sooner. So that's something where we're manipulating the root zone, trying to keep moisture closer to the surface. Once we paint those lines and determine all those different depths of greens mix, then they go ahead and collect millions of points of data rolling the surface. So they want to know inch by inch what height the green surface is, and they input that into their computer systems. Next up, we bring in another contractor, our irrigation consultant, and you can see the pink and purple flags. Those represent where we're going to be having irrigation heads, and it takes a lot of work to identify the best placement for that. Really what we're looking to do is try to provide consistent watering rates across the entire green surface. Each green is going to be treated differently. We have several different options of heads that we can utilize to just make sure that we have consistent watering levels on these surfaces. After we stake out the irrigation heads, the next step in the process is going to be installing the irrigation around the greens. Once the irrigation gets installed, McDonald & Sons will then come back and put 4 inches of topsoil around all the green surfaces. Once the topsoil is installed outside of the green cavity, it is at that time that they start digging down and installing the entire profile. So they will be digging down ultimately anywhere from 10 to 16 inches. And they will start with drainage down an entire network throughout the entire green. From there, it's going to be 4 inches of gravel so that that water can enter the drainage. And like I had mentioned, anywhere from 10 to 14 inches of root zone mix on top of that. The drainage components that we're going to be utilizing is sized appropriately for the use of sub-air if we as a club choose that that's the right fit. We want to make sure that we have the infrastructure in place if down the line we want to include that. However, it's pretty rare to have sub-air systems this far north into the United States. During the short periods of real heat and humidity that Minnesota faces, we really don't feel that that benefit is going to be that great to include a pretty fairly significant purchase of all the sub-air units. We think that the additional drainage that we're going to be providing, the unique root zone that we're going to be utilizing, it's going to provide a great root zone growing environment for the grass plants.
We've seen a lot of art in the process from Andrew, particularly working in the dirt, but also a lot of science, as Brian spoke to, as it relates to gathering the data to rebuild the greens and all of the work that goes into determining the appropriate greens mix to achieve that optimum drainage and growing environment along the way. And so we'll be back here in the coming weeks to update you on our progress and continue to keep you informed as what's happening on the golf course. So until next time.